They are just eating me alive out here.
The porch light is off. That is the first thing you would notice if you stood in my yard right now on a July evening, when every other porch on every other street in this country is buzzing blue-white with a bug zapper, and the air still smells like a citronella candle that cost $12 and did nothing. My porch light is off, and there is not a single mosquito on my arms. 40 feet away, in a mason jar sitting on a fence post, there are around 200 of them, drawn there on purpose, by something that costs 11 cents to make. Most households in this country will spend somewhere between $80 and $300 this summer on sprays, plug-ins, coils, and yard treatments. And by August, they will still be slapping their own necks on the back porch. I have not bought a can of bug spray in 9 years. My wife has not either. My name is Elias Stoltzfus. I am Amish. By the end of this, you will know exactly how to build the thing sitting on my fence post, what it costs, down to the penny, and why it works when the $11 plug-in you bought at the hardware store does not. Stay with me, because near the end I am going to tell you something about why mosquitoes bite some people 4 times as often as others, and it is not the reason you have been told your whole life. I want you picturing that jar for a second, because it matters later. It is not glowing. It is not humming, with a little electric fan bolted onto it. It just sits there in the shade, quiet, looking like nothing at all. And yet, by the second morning, there are more dead mosquitoes floating in that couple inches of sugar water than most bug zappers catch in a whole week of crackling and popping. That contrast, a quiet jar against a loud, expensive zapper, is most of what this whole video is really about. Here is the thing nobody in the pest control business wants you thinking about too hard. It is not some secret meeting where men in suits decide to keep you swatting bugs all summer. It is simpler than that, and in a way worse. A spray that kills the mosquito sitting on your arm right now is a product you buy again next week. A trap that empties your yard of egg-laying females for the whole season is a product you buy once. Nobody needs to sit in a room and agree to sell you the first kind instead of the second kind. They just need to stay quiet about the second kind and let the shelf space do the talking. The Environmental Protection Agency has had efficacy data on CO2 and sent mosquito traps sitting in public registration files since the early 2000s, and you can go read it yourself. But you will not see it advertised on the can of spray next to it on the shelf. Think about the shelf itself for a second. Walk into any hardware store and count how many feet of shelf space are given over to sprays, coils, citronella candles, and plug-in repellents, versus how many feet are given to anything that actually reduces the number of mosquitoes hatching in your yard in the first place. It is not close. That is not an accident of bad luck. Repellents are a subscription you renew every weekend of the summer. A trap that cuts the local population is something you might build once and barely think about again. One of those keeps a shelf full every June. The other one does not. So let me tell you why the mason jar works. In plain words, no biology degree needed. A female mosquito, and it is only the female. The male does not bite at all, finds you almost entirely by smell, not by sight. She is following a plume of carbon dioxide the same gas you breathe out with every breath, drifting on the air the way smoke drifts off a chimney. That drifting, rising, spreading pattern is called a convection plume, but you do not need to remember that word, just remember this. Warm air rises and spreads, carrying your scent with it, like smoke finding its way out through a crack you didn't even know was there. She follows that plume upstream, the way you'd follow your nose to a wood stove, and the closer she gets, the more she also picks up the smell of the lactic acid and other things in your sweat, which tells her, yes, this is a warm-blooded animal with blood in it. What my jar does is fake that whole signal. It produces carbon dioxide the same way your lungs do, just slower, using yeast eating sugar instead of you eating breakfast. And it releases it from a dark, warm container the way your own body does. She cannot tell the difference between my jar and your porch. Now here is the honest caveat, because I promised I would not sell you magic. This trap does not work as well in strong wind, because wind scatters the plume before it can pull her in, and it works better within about 15 to 20 feet than it does trying to protect a whole acre by itself. One jar will not save a 5-acre field. 6 or 8 jars around the edge of a normal yard will make a real difference you can feel within a week. There is one more piece of the science worth knowing, because it explains why placement matters as much as the recipe. Mosquitoes generally fly low and slow, close to the ground and close to vegetation, resting in shade during the heat of the day and becoming active mostly at dawn and dusk. That is why a trap set up on a tall shelf or hung high on a porch post catches far less than one set low, near the grass line, tucked half into a shrub or along a fence where they are already moving. You are not trying to pull them out of open sky. You are trying to sit your trap directly in the path. They are already flying. Now the materials, and I want you to write these down because getting the wrong grade of one ingredient is the single most common mistake people make. You need plain granulated white sugar, about a cup, which runs you somewhere around 50 cents worth out of a 5-pound bag. You need active dry yeast, the same kind sitting in the baking aisle for bread, which costs about $1 for a small packet, and here is the mistake. Do not buy the rapid rise or instant yeast if you can help it. Regular active dry yeast ferments slower and steadier, which means a longer, more even release of carbon dioxide over days instead of one quick burst that's gone by morning. And you need warm water, which costs nothing at all. That is the whole ingredient list, under $2, and most of it you probably already have in the pantry. For the container, a 2-liter soda bottle works, or a mason jar like the ones on my fence post. And it should be a dark color if you can find one, or wrapped in a bit of black cloth or paper, because heat and darkness both speed the fermentation and better mimic the warmth of skin. This is the piece people skip, and their trap works half as well because of it. A word on the water too, since people ask. Tap water is fine. You do not need bottled water, and you do not need distilled water, no matter what you might read on some forum somewhere. The yeast does not care where the water came from, only that it is not so hot it kills the yeast outright, and not full of heavy chlorine straight from a well chlorinator, which can slow fermentation down. If your water smells strongly of chlorine, letting it sit out uncovered for an hour before you use it solves that. Here is how you put it together, and I will walk you through it the way I'd walk my own boy through it. The first thing you do is heat about 2 cups of water until it is warm to the touch, not boiling, because boiling water will kill the yeast before it ever gets started, and that is a mistake that ruins the whole batch. Just warm, like bathwater. Then you stir in your cup of sugar until it is dissolved. After that, you let the water cool down to lukewarm, because hot water kills yeast just the same as boiling water does, only slower, and people rush this step more than any other. Once it's truly lukewarm, you sprinkle in about 1/4 teaspoon of the yeast, just a light dusting across the surface, not a spoonful dumped in a pile, and you do not stir it hard, just a gentle swirl. Pour that mixture into your bottle or jar, filling it about 1/3 to half full, no more, because the yeast needs room to breathe and foam as it works. If you're using a 2-liter bottle, cut the top off just below the shoulder, flip it upside down, and set it back inside the bottom half like a funnel, so mosquitoes can find their way in through the narrow neck, but have a much harder time finding their way back out. If you're using a mason jar, cut a piece of paper into a cone with a small hole at the tip, about the size of a pencil, and set that cone into the jar mouth the same way. Set the whole thing somewhere shaded, somewhere out of direct sun and out of heavy wind, near where you actually sit in the evening, a porch rail, a fence post, the corner of a garden bed. Leave the very top loosely open, no lid, so the gas can escape and draw them in. Within about 6 to 8 hours, you'll see a thin layer of foam building on top, which means the yeast is working and the carbon dioxide is being released. The whole batch keeps working for 1 to 2 weeks before the sugar runs out, and you need to mix a fresh one. Total time to build 1 trap is about 10 minutes, and total cost, ingredients and a reused bottle, comes to somewhere around 15 to 25 cents. A few things people ask me after they've built their first one. If your mixture stops foaming after 3 or 4 days, that just means the sugar has been mostly eaten, and it is time for a fresh batch, not that anything went wrong. If you see fruit flies gathering more than mosquitoes, move the jar further from the kitchen door and closer to the grass line. Since fruit flies are drawn more by the sugar, smell up close, and mosquitoes are pulled in from further off by the carbon dioxide. And if the mixture starts smelling sour and vinegary rather than yeasty and sweet, that is wild bacteria taking over instead of your yeast, and the fix is simple. Dump it, rinse the jar well, and start a fresh batch, because a spoiled batch will not draw mosquitoes the way a fresh one does. I want to be straight with you here, the way I would be with a neighbor asking over the fence, because I won't tell you this makes your yard mosquito-free forever, and I won't tell you it replaces every other bit of common sense, because that would be a lie. It works best as one part of a bigger picture. If you've got a clogged gutter holding water, or an old tire out back collecting rain, this trap is not going to outcompete a breeding ground sitting 15 feet from your porch. It works far better in a yard where standing water has already been dealt with. It also does less for you in very hot, very dry climates where mosquito pressure is lower to begin with. And it takes about a week of steady use, several traps going at once before you notice a real drop in bites. So if you build 1 jar the night before a backyard party expecting a miracle by morning, you will be disappointed. And I'd rather tell you that now than have you feel cheated later. I'll also say plainly that this is not a substitute for personal protection in places where mosquitoes carry real disease risk. And if you or your family are in an area dealing with West Nile virus or something more serious, you should still be using screens, still be avoiding peak dusk hours outdoors, and still be talking to your local health department about what they're seeing that season. A homemade trap is a good tool for cutting down the everyday nuisance biting in a backyard. It is not medicine, and I would never tell you to treat it like one. I learned the water part of this from my grandmother, not the yeast trap itself, but the thinking behind it, which is really the same thinking. She used to walk the edge of our property every few days after a rain, checking the rain barrels and the low spots in the yard, and she'd say to me in her low, matter-of-fact way while she tipped a bucket over, "You don't fight what's already flying, boy, you stop what hasn't hatched yet." She'd been doing that walk since she was younger than me, taught by her own mother, who did it before her. Back when there was no kind of spray to reach for even if you'd wanted one, only attention and habit. That's the same principle sitting in my mason jar today, just dressed up in a bit of yeast and sugar instead of a tipped-over bucket. Different tool, same old idea. Get ahead of the problem instead of swatting at what's already landed on you. My wife's uncle, who kept dairy cows most of his life, had his own version of the same thinking, though he never called it anything special. He'd set out old coffee cans half filled with soapy water under the barn eaves every spring, long before anyone in his family had heard the word trap used for such a thing, just because he'd noticed years back that fewer flies bothered the cattle when he did. Nobody taught him the biology behind it. He simply noticed a pattern, tried it again the next year, and it worked again, and that was enough proof for him. That is most of where old, so-called forgotten knowledge actually comes from. Not laboratories, just patient people paying attention, year after year, and passing along what held up. And I think that's worth sitting with for a minute, because it isn't really just about mosquitoes. The average American family, by some estimates, spends over $200 a year on mosquito and general yard pest control products. And that is money spent every single year, forever, on a problem that a $2 batch of sugar and yeast handles just as well for a fraction of the cost. Multiply that out over a few million households, and you start to see a small fix turning into a genuinely large industry. One that has very little incentive to teach you the $2 version. This knowledge wasn't exactly forgotten. It's more that it stopped being useful to anyone once there was a product to sell instead. And so it quietly slipped out of the conversation, one generation at a time, until most people alive today have never heard their own grandmother mention it. It is worth remembering, too, that mosquitoes are not only an annoyance. Public health researchers have long ranked them among the most dangerous animals on Earth by disease burden, simply because of how efficiently they can move illness from one person to the next in the places where those illnesses are common. Most of us in this country are lucky enough that our worst mosquito problem is an itchy ankle at a cookout. But the same logic that saves you $100 on spray this summer, get ahead of the breeding, don't just fight the adults, is the exact logic that public health programs around the world lean on for far more serious reasons. The $2 jar on your fence post and a multi-million-dollar mosquito control program are, underneath it all, using the same basic idea. So here is your plan for the weekend. Plain and simple. Saturday morning, walk your yard the way my grandmother did, and dump anything holding standing water, buckets, old tires, clogged gutters, saucers under flower pots. Saturday afternoon, mix up 4 to 6 of these traps. It takes about 10 minutes each once you've got the hang of it, and set them around the edges of your yard near where you actually sit outside. Sunday, check your traps once, just a glance, to make sure they're foaming and working the way they should. By the following weekend, you should notice a real difference in how many bites you're getting in the evening, especially if you kept up with emptying standing water alongside it, since the two together do far more than either one does alone. Tell me in the comments where you live and how bad your mosquitoes get. I read every single one, and I'm curious whether this works as well down in the humid parts of the country as it does here in Pennsylvania. And since I brought it up earlier, next time I want to explain why some people get bitten 4 times as often as the person standing right next to them. And it has almost nothing to do with sweetness or blood type the way you've probably always heard. It has to do with a bacteria living on your skin that most people have never once thought about. Until then, empty your buckets and mix your jars. And remember the people who built this country with their hands, new things we are only just starting to remember.